Thank you, Greg. And let me thank all of you for joining us on this very nice and wonderful occasion. Before I begin, let me introduce a few people, some members of the Board of Trustees who are with us today. We have Trustee Emeritus Dr. Neil Barton of the classes of 1958, 1963, and 1966, and his wife, Carolyn. We have Trustee Ms. Nancy Mueller. Where's Nancy? There she is. And we have Trustee and Secretary of the Board, Mr. Curtis R. Prim of the class of 1982, and his wife, Cindy. I want to thank you for being here. I think I haven't forgotten any other trustees. There are various members of the cabinet here. I won't take the time to introduce them all, but I will take the time to introduce Mr. Jonathan Wexler, whose home this is, who is our Vice President for Enrollment. Now, we're here to celebrate a true pioneer, and Dr. Nancy Deloye Fitzroy of the class of 1949 is a true pioneer, as evidenced in part by her illustrious legacy of firsts. And let me just recite a few of them. She is the first woman to graduate with a degree in chemical engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She is the first woman in the United States to serve as president of a major professional engineering society, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. She is the first woman to receive the Davies Medal for Engineering Achievement, which recognizes a Rensselaer alumnus or an alumna with a distinguished career of engineering achievement, public service, and technical and managerial accomplishments. But there have been a number of other accolades. Do you have a week? But I'll tell you a few. Nancy has been the recipient of the Society of Women Engineers Achievement Award in 1972, the Demers Medal for Outstanding Service to Rensselaer in 1975, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers Centennial Medallion in 1980, an honorary Doctor of Science degree from the New Jersey Institute of Technology in 1987. In 1988, she was chosen as an honorary fellow of Britain's Institution of Mechanical Engineers. In 1990, she received an honorary Doctor of Engineering degree from her alma mater, from Rensselaer. She was elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 1995. And then she has had a number of other recognitions here at Rensselaer, receiving the Distinguished Service Award from the Rensselaer Alumni Association in 1996. And she was recognized again in 1999 when she was inducted into the Rensselaer Alumni Hall of Fame. And she was elected a fellow of the ASME, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and received honorary membership in the ASME in 2008. But the important thing to know about Nancy, and it's been a privilege to get to know her, is that throughout her professional career, she's always taken on the greatest challenges, posed by the new and emerging technologies of our time. And that's entirely consistent with how we view ourselves as the new Polytechnic, but she was the new Polytechnic before we entered into that paradigm. But how is it that Nancy decided to pursue a career in engineering at a time when there were not many women in the field? Now, so I'm told, Nancy, in fact, initially did not want to go to college at all. And she recalled, and this is a quote, all of the careers that were thought of for women, librarian, secretary, this, that, I crossed them all off. That's what she said. Now, as a student, however, Nancy gravitated towards science and mathematics, fields that she described as being simply fun. She even gave up a study hall to take a celestial navigation class with her mathematics teacher. Where are our students? His name was Mr. Goodwin. And in all of these courses that she took, Nancy was the only female student in the class, a situation that she would grow accustomed to over the years. But it was Mr. Goodwin who urged her to pursue college and specifically to consider an education in engineering. And here's the interesting part of the story. Nancy wrote to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, asking if they could recommend a school where a young woman might study engineering. Well, Rensselaer and MIT each responded by sending her an application for admission. Now, Nancy's parents always had wanted her to attend college, and they were thrilled to learn that she had applied and was accepted by both universities. But of course, in spite of some of my origins, we are very pleased that Nancy chose Rensselaer. She recalled that at the time she considered herself shy and introverted, and she felt that she would be more comfortable in the smaller classes here at Rensselaer. She also felt that Rensselaer had a better undergraduate school than MIT. In 1945, when Nancy arrived at Rensselaer, she found herself among numerous World War II veterans. She recalled that many were married and had children, and she observed how intent they were to make the most of the educational opportunity afforded them by the GI Bill. As in high school, she found herself the only female in her classes and thought nothing of it. In 1950, Nancy began her career in research and development at General Electric, working at the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory in Niskayuna. Now, she was hired at first as an engineering assistant, but because full-fledged women engineers were unheard of. But she soon became known, not just at GE, but around the world, as an expert in heat transfer and fluid flow, and eventually advised many of her male counterparts once they had worked up the courage to seek out her expertise. And while at the Knowles Atomic Power Lab, Nancy contributed to the development of a liquid metal-cooled nuclear reactor that would later be used by the United States Navy for its second nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Seawolf. Nancy left Knowles to work on a new GE assignment in Malta, New York, called Project Hermes. Under a contract from the United States Army, the team's mission was to design rocket engines, and their efforts focused on advancing technologies that had been initially developed, interestingly enough, by scientists in Nazi Germany as part of its V-2 missile program. Now, the Malta test site, which now is the location of the Malta Tech Park, was carved out of a pine forest where they constructed large cement pits filled with water to help absorb the blasts from engines during testing. But there she met a young engineer named Roland Fitzroy. And while Nancy was working on heat transfer, and she can tell you more about that, for missiles fueled with liquid oxygen and alcohol, this young engineer, Roland, was working on their inertial guidance system. So it was a fitting place for a few sparks to fly, and they did. And Nancy and Roland soon got married, and as Nancy has described, lived their lives together as, quote, two peas in a pod, unquote. Now, Roland Fitzroy himself had a distinguished 41-year career at General Electric after working for the U.S. government during World War II, including on the Manhattan Project. But Nancy, in addition to engineering advances in rockets and satellites, also engineered advances in more commonplace technologies, including toasters. And with her typical modesty and wit, she pointed out that toasters can be more challenging than rockets and satellites. And she says that while space is relatively uniform, bread is almost infinitely various. Now, Nancy worked at General Electric until her retirement in 1987. She holds 3 patents and has authored more than 100 technical papers. So by any measure, Dr. Nancy Deloye Fitzroy has been blessed, and with those blessings, she has achieved much. Born into a loving family, encouraged to reach for the stars, undaunted by convention, joined in life by a kindred spirit, passionate in her pursuits, philanthropic by nature, accomplished and recognized, and a true inspiration to aspiring young women and men seeking to make a difference in the world. Now, Nancy, speaking of those who've been inspired by your life's work, I'd like to share with you 2 notes that I recently received from beneficiaries of the graduate fellowship you established to support young women pursuing advanced degrees in engineering at Rensselaer. The first comes from Dr. Melissa Holstein of the class of 2008. And she wrote, "Dear Dr. Fitzroy, being a scholarship recipient helped to cover my educational costs and ease the burden on my family. I am very grateful. I currently work at Bristol Myers Squibb in Devens, Massachusetts, and my boss is another female RPI Chem-E graduate. Further, we hired another female RPI Chem-E graduate into our group last year. Dr. Fitzroy, being the first female chemical engineering graduate to graduate from RPI, you paved the way for many more to follow in your footsteps." And then there's a second note from Ms. Jessica Funnell, a current PhD student pursuing biomedical engineering. "Please tell Dr. Fitzroy congratulations and that I am so grateful for her financial support. I am loving my first year at RPI. I've worked hard this year, and I'm happy to say that I received the NSF Graduate Fellowship and just submitted my first manuscript. I'm looking forward to the rest of my years here." So you can see it is only fitting that the building we're about to dedicate is one which is home to a team devoted to opening the doors of education to those who seek it. And so it is my privileged and distinct honor to dedicate this building this morning, which I will do with Nancy. And it will be called the Nancy Deloye Fitzroy Class of 49 and Roland V. Fitzroy Jr. Admissions Building. And so, Nancy, we'd like to now have you come forward and share a few remarks with us before we formally do the dedication. Thank you.
Thank you, President Jackson. I'm honored to be here today to dedicate this building in the name of Roland and me. I'm sorry that Roland, my late husband of 53 years, is not here today. He was always supportive of my professional activities. He was the smartest yet the most gentleman that I ever knew. As a child, I was inspired by Amelia Earhart. I wanted to be a pilot. And my first airplane ride as a small child was in a small airplane in the Pittsfield Airport. I was too little to reach the rudder pedals, so I just stood up with my hands on the wheel, and I thought I was flying the airplane. By the time I was 12 or so, I wanted a record player, and my father gave me the necessary components to wire it up, and I built it myself. It was my high school teacher who recommended that I be an engineer. And after some research, that was when I determined that RPI was the right school for me. And the Ricketts Building, being the head of the chemical engineers mainly, was a place where I had the one and only key to the janitor's closet on the second floor landing. That's now an official ladies' room. As a new engineering graduate, during a campus interview with a recruiter, I was simply asked, "Little girl, what are you doing here?" And he wouldn't even talk to me about a job. So my 38-year career in GE, you've already heard a lot about. And so all of this was really made, the whole career was made possible by Rensselaer's excellent reputation and progressiveness in admitting women. Roland and I spent our leisure time sailing, skiing, flying. In the early 60s, I bought a single-engine plane and soon upgraded to a twin-engine Cessna 310 named Nancy's Fancy. I flew that for 25 years. It was my station wagon. And GE let me use my plane on company business, which meant I could fly to an appointment and get back the same day. So despite being a pioneering woman in many fields. I had to skip some of these things because Dr. Jackson already covered them. Despite being a pioneering woman in many fields, once established, I really didn't find any impediments to being a woman engineer. My GE coworkers were very supportive, and women today really have an excellent opportunity to have a fruitful and meaningful career. I encourage young women to study engineering with the thought that the knowledge gained would be useful in understanding the machinations of the technological world that we live in. And finally, the very last and most recent foray into looking into the future and things that were interesting. I, at the tender age of 90 last year, put a deposit on a Model S Tesla car with a 3-year wait list. Thank you, President Jackson and the Board of Trustees, for this high honor of having a building named for Roland and me. It's truly appreciated. Thank you.
So let's undo the plaque. Well, no, you should. And that plaque is right out there.
Oh, wow.
And their names are already on the outside signage. So Nancy, thank you so much for being who you are, for supporting our young women, and for being